India's bid to join NSG. The context. Very recently, India made overtures to join the nuclear supplier group, and the issue of India's application to join the group was taken up in annual plenary at Seoul of the group, but the meet ended without deciding on the issue. However, the bid became highly debated in the backdrop of high-profile engagements that ensued, especially the assurances provided by the US, UK, Japan, and other prominent members of the group. Joining the four groupings, namely NSG, Missile Technology Control Regime, Wassenaar Arrangement, and Australia Group, dealing with weapons and atomic sector around the world, are the most logical steps to be taken by India in its aspiration to join the high tables of diplomacy around the globe. It is noteworthy in this respect that during same period, India made a successful bid to join the MTCR. Now, given the background, let us try to ascertain the significance of the issue from the examination point of view. Significance of the issue. With the preliminary examination 2016 just around the corner, this issue is most ripe for mains examination 2016. Even if this issue is not taken up directly, since it is one of the hottest and UPSC has displayed a tendency of bypassing hot topics, an oblique reference may be drawn to this issue, or it may be kept aside to be taken up next year when the issue cools down somewhat. But one thing for sure, this happens to be one of the prime topics for mains examination. By the way, let us now get to the issue. What is NSG? As the official website of NSG states, the Nuclear Supplier Group is a group of nuclear supplier countries that seeks to contribute to the non-proliferation of nuclear weapons through the implementation of two sets of guidelines for nuclear exports and nuclear-related exports. The NSG guidelines also contain the so-called non-proliferation principle adopted in 1994, whereby a supplier, notwithstanding other provisions in the NSG guidelines, authorizes a transfer only when satisfied that the transfer would not contribute to the proliferation of nuclear weapons. The non-proliferation principle seeks to cover the rare but important cases where adherence to the NPT or to a nuclear weapon-free zone treaty may not by itself be a guarantee that a state will consistently share the objective of the treaty or that it will remain in compliance with its treaty obligations. The NSG guidelines are consistent with and complement the various international legally binding instruments in the field of nuclear non-proliferation. These include the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons, NPT, the Treaty for Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons in Latin America, the South Pacific Nuclear Free Zone Treaty, the African Nuclear Free Zone Treaty, the Treaty on Southeast Asia Nuclear Weapon Free Zone Treaty, and the Central Asian Nuclear Weapon Free Zone Treaty. The NSG guidelines are implemented by each participating government in accordance with its national laws and practices. Decisions on export applications are taken at the national level in accordance with national export licensing requirements. India's relationship with NSG. As has been stated in its official website, the NSG was formed following the explosion in 1974 of a nuclear device by a non-nuclear weapon state, which demonstrated that nuclear technology transferred for peaceful purposes could be misused. For all practical purposes, this is an oblique reference to the nuclear weapon test by India itself in 1974, an irony of sort. During 2005 and 8, during 2005 to 2008, at the height of Indo-US cooperation to successfully complete the 123 agreement, the NSG granted India waiver based on its credentials as a non-proliferator and the self-imposed moratorium on further nuclear weapons test. Since then, nearly 80% of NSG members have engaged in nuclear commerce with India. Outside the grouping, the one-to-one relationship between India and most of the member countries have been extremely cordial and based on mutual trust. Yet, one or two irritants remain which has been plaguing the development of the smooth relationship between India and the grouping. It needs to be mentioned here that presently the NSG controls access to sensitive nuclear technology. In this backdrop, let's try to understand the need for India to join the grouping. Why does India want a membership in NSG? Being honest, given the waiver accorded by the grouping to India in 2008, it may seem to be a mere formality for India to join this group. Yet, doing so may have certain grave implications on India's future policies. Let us discuss them in relative details. Membership of the NSG means access to technology for a range of uses, from medicine to building nuclear power plants for India from the NSG, which is essentially a traders' cartel. India has its own indigenously developed technology, but to get its hand on state-of-the-art technology that countries within the NSG possess, it has to become part of the group. With India committed to reducing dependence on fossil fuel and ensuring that 40% of its energy is sourced from renewable and clean sources, there is a pressing need to scale up nuclear power production. This can only happen if India gains access to energy. Even if India today can buy power plants from the global market, thanks to the one time energy waiver in 2008, there are still many types of technologies India can be denied as it is outside the energy. India could sign the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty and gain access to all these know-how, but that would mean giving up its entire nuclear arsenal. Given that it is situated in an unstable and unpredictable neighborhood, India is unlikely to sign the NPT or accede to the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty or CTBT that puts curb on any further nuclear tests. With access to latest technology, India can commercialize the production of nuclear power equipment. This in turn will bolster innovation and high-tech manufacturing in India and can be leveraged for economic and strategic benefits. For example, India has signed a civil nuclear energy cooperation pact with Sri Lanka. Currently, this entails training people in peaceful uses of nuclear energy, including use of radioisotopes, nuclear safety, radiation safety, nuclear security, radioactive waste management, and nuclear and radiological disaster mitigation. Should India get access to advanced nuclear technologies, it can start building updated versions of its own fast breeder reactor and sell it to countries such as Sri Lanka or Bangladesh. Bangladesh is currently looking at buying Russian reactors for power generation. Having the ability to offer its own nuclear power plants to the world means spawning an entire nuclear industry and related technology development. This could give the Make in India program a big boost. Should India get membership to the NSG, it can block Pakistan from its membership as entry into the grouping is by consensus only. This is one of the reasons why China is pushing to include Pakistan as well as pointing out that India as a non-signatory to the NPT cannot be a member. It comes down to a power game. Keep India out and deny it access to various technologies. India's contention is that its nuclear technologies are indigenously developed and it has a clean non-proliferation record, unlike Pakistan, whose non-proliferation record was tainted with the revelation that its nuclear scientist Abdul Qadir Khan sold nuclear technologies to countries such as North Korea. China's non-proliferation record too is tainted with allegations that it has helped Pakistan on this lie. But given its economic clout, the country is unlikely to attract sanctions. Over and above all the arguments placed above, we need to take into consideration the recent attempts by China and a few other countries towards making the signing of NPT mandatory in the guise of further strengthening the non-proliferation environment more stringent. If passed, this move can undo what India gained out of the waiver of 2008. Once inside, India can successfully block these attempts as all the decisions inside NSG are taken on the basis of consensus only. What are the objections being raised and by whom? As was demonstrated in the annual plenary of the NSG held in Seoul, South Korea, China, along with 7 more countries, stood against India's entry into the grouping. Of the countries opposed to India's entry, countries like Brazil and Turkey called for a criteria-based process to be put in place first, and others like Austria, Ireland, New Zealand, and Switzerland raised the NPT question. However, the officials in India hinted at China being the prime country who blocked the move, as, according to them, the NPT issue was settled in 2008 itself when the waiver was granted to India. This raises a question. Why is China so opposed to India joining this group? Chinese diplomats say Beijing wants NSG entry to be norm-based. In other words, whatever rules govern Indian entry should apply to others too. Norm-based entry would presumably help Pakistan gain entry, something many in the NSG are certain to resist because of the country's record as proliferator of nuclear weapons technology to Iran, Libya, and North Korea. This is more because many countries in the region are seeing India as a possible counterweight to China. Why then did China go along with the NSG waiver in 2008? Simple answer, geopolitics. The 2008 one-time waiver allowed nuclear commerce between NSG members and India. The agreement that now allows Westinghouse and its competitors in France or South Korea to bid to set up civilian nuclear reactors in India. The waiver came only after President Bush rang President Hu Jintao and called in a favor. Back then, US-China relations were riding high. On the back of surging trade and a common vision of how the international order should be structured. Today, President Barack Obama and President Xi Jinping are at odds over China's muscle flexing in the South China Sea. The odds of a phone call changing the state of play are next to zero. Way ahead. The energy's importance lie in that it is a long-lasting example of the shape of things to come with regard to a world order based on norms of behavior of sovereign states. The energy was founded in a short-lived phase of detente during the Cold War, which began with the Strategic Arms Limitation Stock (SALT I) and the Anti-Ballistic Missile Treaty, but petered out by the late 1970s. The Soviet Union, though a staunch friend of India, had joined the NSG as a voluntary grouping of seven to supplement and ensure a fledgling non-proliferation framework against another surprise like India's 1974 nuclear test. The founding members were the NATO allies led by the US. The Cold War thumb rules accommodated eight more by 1978, three from each side of the divide, plus Austria and Switzerland. At the time, the NSG's bite was weak, and the US enacted stiffer domestic legislations in 1978 for effective export controls. This included comprehensive International Atomic Energy Agency safeguards to regulate the export of non-nuclear weapon states. These, the NSG could adapt only in 1992 after the Iraq shock. The NSG ushered in stricter guidelines and vastly expanded membership after the Soviet collapse. The expanded NSG has since comprised Russia and the member states of the NATO, EU, OECD, as well as important emerging economies from outside these groups. The overwhelming membership of the NSG by and large acquiesced to the US leadership. A senior US diplomat in charge of non-proliferation once remarked that he had the special responsibility of presiding over the global non-proliferation order. China arrived there at its own pace in 2004. In this historical setting sprang the transformation of the Indo-US relationship during the last decade. It was born out of a sustained dialogue and a thorough reassessment by the US of nuclear India's capability, actions and readiness to conform to the global regime while retaining a strategic nuclear and missile program. While India's early outreach with individual members of the NSG was also appreciated, getting the US on board, they said, was critical. Therefore, when the US stepped in to secure India's NSG exemption during 2005 and 8, India was generally optimistic. The 2008 exemption vindicated that optimism and inspired the logical next step, that is, the formal entry into the NSG. India's worthiness has been repeatedly acknowledged since 2008 by President Barack Obama. This might come the reductionist refrain that having got the NSG exemption, India's quest for entry into NSG was redundant and only for status. Facts, on the contrary, point to India's record and capability to add value to the NSG, much unlike some others. The US, Russia, France, UK, Germany, Japan, and a very large number of NSG members sympathize with this differentiated assessment. It is this assessment that calls into question the imposition of a one-size-fits-all approach just to hinder India's entry. As far as the criteria are concerned, their role should pertain to regulating the exports of nuclear reactors, energy and resources technology, and sensitive material rather than in fixing eligibility among a range of states. Forcing in this context an arbitrary non-NPT category is oversimplified, to say the least. Building trust with individual members of the group is critical to diplomacy. NSG today comprises more states than the United Nations at its inception. No UN organ or agency with such large membership is inflexible about a consensus rule. The IAEA Board of Governors, with 35 members, strive in the Vienna spirit for consensus but allows voting when the situation warrants. Ditto in the boards of other UN bodies like the ECOSOC. However, it is for the NSG members to consider how they strive for consensus, respecting the views of every individual member. While bilateral outreach is necessary to individual members, some might take umbrage to public questioning or second guessing of NSG's confidential process by non-members. Having been at it for years, Indian diplomats at the helm today are familiar with every nuance of this process. Diplomacy's lexicon since Clemens Wenzel has set store by discreetness and politesse in communication, which cannot be derided as yachna or begging. So the supercilious rant seen in India's media debates on the Seoul experience hardly help. In sum, there is no escape from continued engagement to reach the desired goal. Terms used in the NSG's carefully drafted public statement do not exclude India's entry or consideration thereof. There is room for India's friends and supporters to persevere, but India must also demonstrate its commitment without being presumptive. Most unwise will be the repetition of the sterile ruckus during 2005 and 8, hindering endeavors towards Indo-US nuclear cooperation. Thank you.